stuff like that rather than like military conquests and so on. And I'll quickly introduce Professor Lal, who possibly needs no introduction. But I mean, I won't read out or the usual stuff that you could probably look it up online. But I'll start with an anecdote. Like I joined the institute like about a year back, September 2014, and like it was my second or third day. A scholar in my department, like one of those like first days, like when people ask you like what do you do, what you work on, and so on. And when I said that I have a degree in cultural studies and I work on cultural studies, and like the scholar is here and he will be able to testify, and he said, well, I don't know what cultural studies is, but I watched some lecture by a professor from US on YouTube. And then he pulled up this YouTube videos, which amazingly I found to be Professor Lal's. And then I was so surprised that this is like a tiny provincial town in Silchar, and somebody who's not even from the humanities, like he is a scholar in the economics, and he knows Professor Lal's lecture from the YouTube. So I mean, like not that I met him before, like this is the first time I'm meeting him. Like I think he did a couple of references for me. Other than that, we had a few email exchanges, but that's not the issue. But like I was so surprised, and like it was kind of like it left me in kind of an awe that somebody in a provincial town like Silchar. Could you please come and sit here?
I'm fine.
Could you come and sit here?
Yeah.
All. Could all of you come and sit?
It's okay. Proceed.
Yes, in picking up the threads, it's kind of left me in awe that like people working, a research scholar working on economics knows Professor Lal from his YouTube lectures. So anyway, I'll leave the floor to Professor Patwari, whom is the local Gyan coordinator of the institute, and he might be able to talk about a little bit about our institute and maybe a small welcome address for the participants.
Yeah. A very good morning, Professor Lal, Professor Rai, Professor Abhishek Rai, and participants, faculty members, students. I, on behalf of NIT Silchar, welcome all of you for this 5th Gyan course at NIT Silchar. NIT Silchar has started this program last year, and then 4 courses already we had in various technical departments, and all the 4 were the technical, but this is the 5th course, which is a bit non-technical, and it is in humanities stream and social like that. So we are very much thankful to Professor Lal. He has accepted our invitation, and he is today with us for this course, and I have a strong belief that this will be a very fruitful course. Although the number of participants are very less compared to the other programs in this one, but still it will have much more impact. And one is a very good thing about this program is that more than 90% of the participants are from outside this institute. Usually what happens in previous programs, we have got so many in-house participants, and that was the majority. But this is the first time I have seen that in this program, although the numbers are less, but most of the participants are from very far distant. And they have taken lots of enthusiasm, and they have come there with us. And this program will really be successful, I wish. And I congratulate Abhishek Rai for arranging this program and making it realized in this form. So once again, I welcome all of you, and I hope all of you will have a very nice time, and really the course will be enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Patwari. I mean, he has been like, thoroughly cooperative all through. Like he has put together in all the groups that we have been making since maybe a few months from now. And like when I and Professor Lal started working on the course, like the deadline was fast approaching, and like I joined the institute new, and I didn't have a clue that the deadline was like so fast approaching, and like we literally like put together the course in a week or so, which couldn't have been possible without Professor Patwadi's throughout cooperation. So thank you, Professor Patwadi. Can I invite Professor Roy for a few words now?
Professor Lal, Professor P.K. Patwadi, Professor Abhishek Rai, and dear participants and my dear students, good morning to all of you. So I join Professor Patwadi to welcome you, sir, in this course. And thanks for accepting our invitation from the long way. And with as Abhishek mentioned, we have some introduction to you for the last few years. It's very good that we had already mentioned we had 5 GAN courses, and most of the participants, in-house participants, though in all, each and every courses there was a participant, but number were I think 4 or 5 like that. But here majority is from outside and is far away from Silchar, so you will have a very good interaction in this course. General notion actually, when we people generally it's happened. And it's true also. I believe that general notion, whenever we have seen some title in sociology or humanities, we all people, okay, I can give some expert knowledge, I can give an expert talk or something like that. But I believe in other way. Whatever the topics in any subject or any field, it's better to leave to the expert people for deep understanding of this rather than the superficial knowledge or something like that. So you will have whatever your idea about this, your thinking, your knowledge, and your further know about of this. So you will have an interaction. I believe you interact anything, you express your mind, whatever your thought in these topics, and then get or neutralize or even come to a conclusion better, so that you can then pass over to other people, other segment, so that it will be a fruitful course. Okay, so you interact vigorously and have a nice 5 days here, and all them are staying in the guest house. So I think you enjoy this winter here over Silchar. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Roy, for your address. And can I now welcome you, open the floor for a small introduction of the course.
Good morning. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I'd like to thank Professor Patwadi and Professor Rai, and of course my colleague Abhishek, who will be joining me in teaching this course. Let me just say a few words by way of an introduction, not just to the course only, but rather to some fundamental questions that are behind this course. The first is that I think it's a pity that in India, this is a problem not particular to India. It's a problem that I think we find all over the world, but I think in India the problem is particularly acute. It's a pity that we have not been attentive to the humanities at all. And I think that we need to reinforce that point, particularly in an institute of technology, if I may say so. Because the supposition that technology is going to resolve all our problems for us is about as fallacious an assumption as there is in the world. And I think it is also important to note the fact that the opposite assumption, namely that liberal education always emancipates, is also something that we have to be deeply suspicious about. One of the things that the ascendancy of Donald J. Trump in the United States has shown is that you can have a country where the vast majority of people are literate in some sense of the term, and you can still elect a jackass and a misogynist and a racist and much worse to the presidency of the country. That's what it's shown. And this is not the first time that it's happened, but I think that given that now that we are much more acutely aware of the kinds of things that happen, I think it's instructive for us in India to think about that as well. I once wrote an article published about 8 or 10 years ago, which no one took seriously. It was an article where I proposed that when an American election takes place, the entire world should be allowed to vote. Because what happens in the United States has an influence in the rest of the world. When Somalia goes to the elections, it doesn't have repercussions for the rest of the world. But when the United States has elections, it has repercussions for everyone. Right? Now, why am I saying that? Because I think that we need to think seriously about what constitutes the humanities, what constitutes a liberal education, what constitutes such things as expertise. I was introduced as an expert. I have to say that I disavow use of that word completely. What we're going to be doing in this course is we're going to be finding out what are the problems with people who are experts, and when they propose certain knowledge frameworks to understand a society, which is exactly what the British were doing in India. The history of India, as I'm sure many of you are aware, particularly the history of British India, had until about 30, 35 years ago been written predominantly as the history of what governor generals did, what Curzon did, what Dalhousie did, what the Indian civil service did, right? Or it had been written as a series of military conquests. And of course, there was some attentiveness to such things as how India fared under the British in economic terms. You had the drain theory, which goes back to people like Dadabhai Naoroji, but then at JNU, there were a whole bunch of historians, Bipin Chandra, for example. Those used to be the predominant strands of history. Now, I think about 30, 35 years ago, with the advent of post-colonial theory, and I'm sure there are a few of you in this room who are aware of some of the debates that have arisen as a consequence of that, the registers in which we began to think about history in India began to change. And not change necessarily in a very substantial way, because I don't think one should assume that what the group of historians known as the subaltern historians, of course the group has now dissolved, so to speak, but I don't think we should assume that that became really the norm in Indian history all over India. Not at all, not by the remotest stretch of the imagination. It's like anthropology. If you look at anthropology, 80% of anthropologists in India still do what is called physical anthropology, actually. 80%. Physical anthropology, you measure the distance between, the distance between your eyebrows and the navel, and that's supposed to be something called science. 80% of our anthropologists still do that in India. And I can tell you the bulk of the historians still do the kind of history that used to be done before. Of course, however, subaltern history became a school of thought from India, as it were, or generated by Southern historians and cultural studies specialists and so forth and so on, which began to circulate to the rest of the world. And so subaltern studies is in fact actually a critical moment, because it was a moment when theory from the South, what is now called the global South, began to actually permeate into the North as well. I mean, I can tell you that American historians were probably the most provincial in the world, right? Because you only need to know one language when you do American history, that's English. And one of the things you'll find out, I don't stand by political correctness in the remotest sense of the term. So there'll be things that I'll be saying, you can completely reject them, and you might take them as comical remarks if you want to. But I very often say that Americans have difficulty enough learning one language, namely English, forget about learning a second or third language. Right? Now, American historians are definitely the most provincial in the world. The only body of literature they ever study is American history. Right? I can tell you that. And the interesting thing is that even historians of the United States began to read, a few of them, subaltern studies. So this is how far subaltern studies had moved into the academy in the global North. Right? But this is all by way of saying that what we are going to attempt to do here is something very different, I think, than what has been done in the ordinary course of affairs when we study Indian history. Because even subaltern history didn't fundamentally ask certain kinds of epistemological questions. And one of those epistemological questions has to do, that's why I go back to this question of the expert, it has very much to do with what happens when certain bodies of knowledge are produced, right? Why were the British so interested in producing a vast body of knowledge about cartography, right? About history, 18th century texts? Why were they so prolific? And I'm going to show you when we start the course formally, I'll begin with a PowerPoint slide where I'll just show you very quickly 3 slides, and you'll see the number of texts that were produced. And that's just a small selective list. Right? What are the implications of that? Right? Because from there, we then want to extrapolate to something that we will not be able to do in this course, because that's another course altogether. And that is, I think, the fundamental problem for us who want to think about the nature of the world and what are the ways in which we think about the world. And that fundamental problem is that no matter what discipline we work in, each discipline is bound to certain categories. These categories are what help us produce a picture of the world. And the question is, how is it that some categories become hegemonic, that they become decisive in the task of interpretation? Right? And what this course will be dedicated to is precisely this idea of trying to understand what were the categories that were produced by the British. What does the epistemological conquest of India really mean? Because, for example, I do think, just as an illustration, although that will not be one of the 10 or 12 sessions that we will be focused on, I do think, as an illustration, and here again, this is a provocation, you don't have to agree with me at all, but I do think that the middle class understanding of Hinduism that you have in India today is almost entirely a colonial understanding of Hinduism. And so all the people who are advocates of the Hindutva worldview, who keep on beating everybody on the head that you're not a proper Hindu, they are the ones who least understand something called Hinduism, if you ask me. That's an illustration of what I mean when I say that the categories, that the worldview that was produced was absorbed to such an extraordinary extent by middle-class Indians especially, that there is virtually no recognition or understanding of that. And so I think that for people who are interested in the humanities, and I think it's very important that a country like India, which at one point, certainly in the Nehru era, whatever one's views about Nehru, and I'm not interested for the moment in that, but whatever is one's views about Nehru and that period, it is unquestionably clear that India was certainly a country that was recognized as being at the helm of the global South. The whole idea of the non-aligned movement, the conference in Bandung in 1955, which was of critical importance in the shaping of a certain kind of sensibility in Asia and Africa, I don't think India holds that position at all. One of the reasons it did was because one of the consequences of the anti-colonial struggle was the capacity to think among some of the elites somewhat differently about many of the issues. So very often the question is asked, what was Gandhi's legacy, so forth and so on. And again, one can debate that constantly. But even the idea of a third space, which Nehru was very much interested in articulating, is frankly something that comes out of Gandhi's canon. Right? So, in short, what I'm suggesting is this, that first, that this course is not about the history of British India in the ordinary sense of the term. It's not about, did the British really ruin us or not? Shashi Tharoor has just written a book. It's just come out. I haven't read it yet, but it's about how we got bled by the British. And maybe we did. Most likely we did. But we're not interested in assessing that kind of question. This course is devoted to the question of the bodies of knowledge produced by the British themselves about India. And then if we understand the implications of that, then I think you understand the implications of the bodies of knowledge, such as sociology, anthropology, history, geography, economics, with which we work today, which I don't think in their present form are going to help emancipate most Indians. So the idea is to try to understand what are the categories that were being deployed in these texts. That is what we are fundamentally interested in. And I want to reiterate what I started with, that I think it's really very important that in India, we be much more attentive to the humanities and the related social sciences. And I think, therefore, it's wonderful that a place like NIT, which is really an institution where the vast majority of the students are students in the sciences, and that's where the government of India has put its money for a long time now, in these institutes. That's why our major universities are going to pieces, frankly, literally. And I taught I left UCLA for 2 years and assumed a position at the University of Delhi. So I know firsthand. I taught at the University of Delhi, history department, not so very long ago. And so I have a first-hand experience of what's happening at the leading universities in India, such as JNU and DU. And I don't think anybody could give a report that would be considered to be very good about these institutions anymore. And I'm not speaking about the quality of the faculty, which actually can be quite high at many of these institutions, but I'm talking about the entire worldview that we have of what constitutes a university. What is a university after all? What is the function of a university? Not a single Indian has actually ever written about what is the nature and function of a university. There is a massive literature on that in the West. Because the universities are the institutes through which we groom, train, educate people to assume not just positions of, quote, leadership, to use one of these words that administrators love to use all the time, leadership. The main thing is to actually become thinking beings and to reflect upon the world and try to grapple with the nature of the world that we're living in. That's what a university fundamentally should enable one to do in the first instance. And we need to understand what is the nature of a university. So I think it's very good that an institution of technology has at least the space for a course in the humanities. And I hope very much that this will continue, that this kind of trend will continue, where the institutes of technology, I mean, I can give you the illustration of MIT, which many people think of simply as an institute of technology, right? Probably the most famous one of its kind, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. But I don't know how many of you know that the most ambitious publishing program in architectural history is based at MIT. I could give you 50 other examples of what goes on at MIT, which have nothing to do with engineering or the sciences. That most of the interesting work that has been done on artificial intelligence from a humanistic standpoint has been done, for example, at places like MIT. So forth and so on. And of course, many of you know that Noam Chomsky, some of you may be familiar with his writings on politics, but of course, as you know, that before he became a major commentator on American politics and global politics, which he has been since the period of the Vietnam War, that he first established a reputation as the foremost linguist in the world. Now, and that doesn't mean that I think he necessarily is that, because he has a certain style of thinking with which I have some difficulties, but I'm just saying that before he ventured into this talking about politics, he had established a reputation, and he was a professor at MIT his whole life, right? So when we say an institute of technology, we should never read it in the narrow sense of the term. I think in India, unfortunately, it is read that way. And then you have a token humanities department. Students who study engineering, they should know a little bit about literature. Also, they should know a little bit about history, become well-rounded, as they say. And that's not the way that we want to treat our humanities. Because without the humanities, how do you fundamentally learn to be a human and to interact as a human? Right? And no amount of scientific technical knowledge will actually give us those tools. I think we should be very clear about that. And this, I think, problem goes back to the post-independent period when Nehru committed himself to a certain worldview. And then, of course, but it was still tempered in those days because Nehru was a man of very wide ecumenical learning, extremely wide ecumenical learning. So that worldview was still tempered, but I think that over the years, we only retained that kind of technical vision that we associated with him and dropped everything else. So I hope that this will be an occasion to also reflect on the position of the humanities in India, the position of the humanities in education as a whole, right? And once again, finally, that even though this course is dedicated to largely the late 18th, 19th century, moving into the early 20th century, that its implications, I think, extend to our times and the way we think about the world today. So I look forward to interacting with you over the course of the next several days. Thank you.
Thank you so much for precisely introducing the course and bringing topics beyond that. And then you say humanity, you connect, like the last part of your lecture, you try to connect humanities with the human. That's kind of vicious and maybe